Well, it's time for a new video. I figured I'd talk a little bit about some of these that I've seen. I had a website I operated for a while until I got to where it was too much trouble. Really, I wasn't the best at doing a website, because what you need to do if you want your website to last is you have to update the like Joomla, which is what I was using. And so my website had a lot of material on it. And it also had a place where you could email me and ask questions and that kind of thing. And it was called askamechanic.info. I don't know who's got that URL now, but it's not me. But one way or another, people used to email me, and they would tell me these stories about, and I've seen this in real life too, here around, in person, how they would go to one shop and maybe they weren't satisfied with the work that the first shop did, and then they would go to another shop without even going back to the first shop and letting them straighten it out, and then they would get dissatisfied with work that and pay that other shop a bunch more money, and they would go to shop number 3, and by that time it turns into a not me, not me, not me kind of a deal, and then they're all disgusted because they spent $400 or $500 or $600. Some of you shop owners have seen this, where they have spent all their money somewhere else and they want you to fix it real cheap. You know how that works. But and basically when they would email me and say I took it to this first shop and he didn't do what I think is a good job, and I'd say, well, why don't you take it back to the guy and try to get him to work with you, because a lot of the times they will. But anyway, people would email me and I would try to help them out. These are some of the times when I was successful and figured out what was wrong, and I got good input back from them. This one here was a 2000 Lincoln LS V8. And he said, in the past few months, every time I back up and start forward, and there's any slipping of the tires, such as snow or on gravel, a message appears to check traction control, then the radio goes off, the windows won't work, and finally the car dies. He misspelled won't there. I can have it jumped off and it will be fine until the next time the scenario happens. Can I turn the traction control off, or will this cause any damage? Now, well, think about the car, if you've been familiar with any of these and you've worked on some, and think about what you might tell this guy. And as soon as I read it, I had an idea that I knew what it probably was. And so I said, what I told him was, I said, the traction control is not causing that. Believe it or not, you got a bad ignition coil, bad cop coil, one of the cop coils. Somebody needs to just find out which one it is. You got several. Let me know what happens. And then he says he's replaced 2 coils, and his mechanic told him he needed to replace the other soon. He wouldn't be able to detect the problem with this. Can't wait to tell him about this was the problem all along. Thanks so much. Now, those cop coils have a tendency to short out and spike the electronics, and it can happen on any of them. I've seen it cause crazy running problems on expeditions even. There's cutting up and popping and snorting to where you'd think there was even something wrong with the gasoline. And unplug the coils, one at a time, and until you find the one that makes the problem go away. And it doesn't really cost a lot of anything to do that, but at the same time, that's a fairly common problem. And the electronics are just go crazy when they do it. And you switch it off and it resets and you crank it back up. You got a pretty good idea of what it was. He said that fixed that. Well, this guy said he had a 98 Dodge Grand Caravan, bought it about a month ago, had a little over 100,000. Running just fine for about 2 weeks. The transmission leaked the red oil. So the garage where he got the car from repaired the transmission. Alright, so if he puts it in gear on reverse, sometimes it doesn't catch and the engine just revs. When they're driving, sometimes the gear will go to neutral and the car doesn't go forward. And I had to stop and put the gear in place. Sometimes it just takes a while before it catches. In reverse, you had to put the car to drive and then put it back to reverse. This is one of the very first things I learned about automatic transmissions when I was a very young man. If it does this kind of hogwash, or if you go around a corner and it drops into neutral or something like that, it typically means there's not enough fluid in it. Ever so often you may even see one where there is the wrong dipstick in there, and they'll think it's full of fluid and it's not. Now, on some of these new Ford 10-speed transmissions that like to overheat, if any of you guys have ever fooled with any of those, the fluid that's used in those, I think they call it UVEX or something like that, it expands faster than any fluid Ford has ever used in those transmissions. And what happens is people will think they've got it full of fluid at 160 degrees when they've actually got it over full. So if you heat the transmission up to about 220 and then top it off with fluid, it won't overheat. I've got that on good authority from a guy that I trained that's working at the Ford place over there now. And he said he fixed one like that had beat everybody up. And basically he just interfaced with the field service engineer and they talked about it and figured out that that's what it was. All right. I told him he needed fluid. Well, see that? Wait a minute. I told him he needed to put fluid in it. So I said, it sounds like transmission's low on fluid. If it drops into neutral when you're going around a curve and doesn't want to engage first thing in the morning, check the transmission fluid with the engine warm and running. Let me know why that happened. You know, if it's a Chrysler, you're supposed to put it in neutral and this kind of stuff. But anyway, he took the car back to the garage. They kept it half a day and told me it cost over $500 to fix it. That's kind of interesting in and of itself, wasn't it? All right. Told him I'll think about it. So I took the car to another place and asked them to check the transmission fluid. They said it was low. They filled it up and I don't have the problem anymore. Sometimes it's just a simple fix. You can overthink it. And I don't think that shop that told him he needed to rebuild the transmission was trying to take him for a ride, although they should have checked the fluid. But because the symptoms said to me, it was just screaming low fluid level to me. All right. He says the guys at the garage were talking about taking the whole transmission down, blah, 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 you're a lifesaver. You know, they fluff you up and all that. Well, help desk story number 3. This guy said, I got a 94 Ranger 4-wheel drive with a 3-liter. A few months ago, it was running rough. Took it to a shop and they put a number 2 injector in it to fix the problem of running rough. But since then, it's had a problem starting. It'll start right up in the morning, drive it for a while, and turn it off. It'll start right up again. But if I let it sit about an hour to 5 hours, I got to crank it a couple of times to get it to start. And when it starts, it runs rough for a couple of seconds, and sometimes you can smell gas like it's flooded. All right. Now, there's a few things come to mind there. And whenever I've talked about this on these videos before, he said he took it back to the mechanic. They replaced the fuel pressure regulator, the fuel pump, the relay, the EEC relay, checked and reset the timing to no avail. He says he has no idea. Please help. Thanks. And I told him, get it to the point where it'll exhibit the symptom, shut it off while it's running bad, pull the plugs, and a sooty or wet one will have a dripping injector. Now also, if you pull one and it's wet with coolant and steaming, you know, you got a head gasket issue on that cylinder. Well, this guy right here was real humdinger with his follow-up. Thanks, works great now, Tom. You really got to appreciate this guy's follow-up. I don't know if we got it fixed or not. You know, it seemed like he'd have given me more detail than that. He didn't tell me what he had to do to fix it or if it was even fixed. Sometimes people just want a silver bullet. They want you to tell them, I can tighten this screw right here and all of your problems will go away and you'll never even need another oil change. And I have one guy that's brought me his Power Stroke diesel when I was at the dealership, and I had to put a set of injectors in it because the O-rings were coming apart on them and all that. And I put him a set of injectors in there and got it all burped out and made sure, you know, change oil and that kind of stuff. And I pulled it back up there and he goes, okay, so it's not going to give me any more trouble, is it? And I says, no, you'll never have any more trouble with this truck. As long as you live, you'll never even have to have an oil change, or you might not even ever have to put fuel in it again. It's going to run perfect forever. He says, oh, come on, man. I said, well, I don't know. I put some injectors in. It's running good now. It's about the best I can help you, you know. Anyway, in this consumer-driven world, though, people will take their business elsewhere if they don't like the merchandise or the service. So rather than giving the first shop a chance to straighten things out, they just try another shop. And I always ask them why they take it back to the first shop. It just makes sense to do that. Now, some of them tell me they've gone back to the first shop only to be told that more money needs to be spent. And that's a little irritating too. So who wouldn't lose confidence in a shop that pulls that kind of nonsense? Now, from the shop owner, technician's perspective, it seems like the deck is stacked against us if the vehicle has been poorly maintained and is very old. One time there was a guy that brought his truck in over there, and it was an old 80 model Ford truck, and this thing was so doggone rusty that you could grab the hold of the sides of the bed and pull them like this. When you mashed the clutch, it had a stick in it. When you mashed the clutch, the whole dash would bow up because the bulkhead was rotten. I mean, that truck was an absolute junkyard waiting to happen. And he wanted to see about something going on with the engine. I don't remember what it was. But the service writers, goofy service writers, they weren't thinking about the fact that this thing was worth about $25 sitting out there by the road with a for sale sign on it, running. They said, needs a motor overhaul or whatever. I don't remember what it was. Needs some engine work, $1,200 worth. And so this guy told him to go ahead and do it. And so he just didn't ever come pick it up. And he had the idea that he was going to show up down there at the mechanics lien auction and buy it for $100 or something after he got $1,200 worth of engine work. And the dealer principal sent one of our salespeople down there to keep upping the bid on it until that guy wouldn't buy it. You know, they wanted to make sure that guy paid as much for it as he could. You know, he said, don't sell it to anybody for a penny less than $1,200 because that's what the guy owes on it. And so anyway, we wound up getting that doggone truck back, and we used it to haul junk around the lot. It was trash. I mean, it wasn't even. It had busted tail lights and everything. It was just a disaster. Anyway, this guy here brought me a truck, an '80s model Ford truck. It was like an '85 model that barely had the hood open since it was brand new. And you've seen those kind. They come in. They hadn't touched them for a very long time. They're just total junk, you know. And I say they're total junk. The truck wasn't in terribly bad shape, but it was poorly maintained. All right, and so what I did was, it was a '86 F-150. It looks a lot like that one. It was a rough idle stalling issue, and I found clogged idle air control passages, nasty throttle body, gasoline contaminated engine oil, misfired plugs that had almost melted away, a plugged fuel filter, late ignition timing, TP sensor with a ragged seal, and a vacuum leak. Probably had so much stretch in the timing chain, you know, that it was weak because of that too. But anyway. So, we created an estimate, got the go-ahead, and made the repairs that I felt, and then test drove the truck. You know, had tuned it all up real good and everything, and it ran real good. Okay, so the guy comes back, and he throws this flag, my truck still ain't fixed, because you didn't do your job good enough. And so, anyway, I did some more troubleshooting on it, and it was an intermittent problem that he was having this time. It wasn't an all-the-time problem like he was having before, running just terrible all the way around. But I found out that, you know, back in the day, before 1990, when Ford had fuel injection, and they started, you know, in the mid-'80s putting fuel injection on their pickup trucks and Rangers and stuff, it had a lift pump in the tank, which was basically almost like a windshield washer pump. It wasn't a positive displacement pump. It was supposed to deliver fuel to the pump that was mounted on the frame, and then that pump would create a pressure and go to the front. Well, when that pump in the tank goes dark, then what happens then is your pump on your frame on those trucks would lose its prime sometimes. His pump was working sometimes and sometimes it wasn't. Like, for example, I'd unplug the main pump, and I would energize the fuel pump at the VIP test connector, you know, put a little jumper in those two wires, and I'd put my ear or my stethoscope up against the bottom of the fuel tank to see if I could hear that in-tank pump running. If I couldn't hear the in-tank pump running, I'd know that was the problem. You know, it would either be a wire problem or the pump, but typically it's the pump, because in most situations, the part that's working the hardest and is the most hostile environment is what's going to fail, and we had to put a lot of those pumps in there. But a lot of mechanics didn't think about that pump in the tank as long as the one on the pump frame was running. If the one on the frame was really noisy, you have an idea that it was, you know, getting cavitated or air or trying to get a prime, you know, spinning dry. And so I told him he was going to have that pump in the tank. So he leans back and folds his arms and he says, "So, is that going to fix my truck?" You know? And so I hadn't sold the guy anything that he didn't need the first time around. Now, he had a pretty good bill, but this was just something that there was so many other problems the truck had. It was running so terrible that he thought this was all going to be taken care of together. Well, it was one more thing that was wrong. All right, so basically what I told him was, I says, you'll have to let us put this pump in there, and it's an old truck, you hadn't worked on it very much, and you know, I basically was tempted to say you'll never have to have the truck worked on again as long as you live and won't even need another set of tires, but I didn't say that. Anyway, he let us put the pump in there, and he never, you know, never complained again about that truck. All right, the 99 Exposition Expedition rather had a leaking heater core. That core had been replaced 2 years ago by another shop for leaking, but now it was leaking again. Alright, so getting to it's a little bit bare on that one, you know, it's a little aggravating to do. I was going to pull the dash off to get to it, and I had a student that was really willing to dive into that, and he did a good job of it. Alright, so he found out that the blend door was in there upside down. Whoever put it back together, there was rust all down in here. And he said, okay, so this was a problem here. And so he went ahead and put the heater core in there, got rid of the, you know, of course the rust was coming out of the leaking heater core anyway. But that was talking, you know, there's a lot of rust in the cooling system, and that electrolysis can do a lot of nasty mess. Now, a lot of times, see, this has got a little restrictor in it. That is the one going in. This is the one coming out. If somebody hooks those, see, these are the same size pipe. If somebody hooked the pipes up backwards and the restriction is here, it's liable to bust the heater core, because whenever you restrict what's coming out, you know, it's going to try to swell up. And that used to happen sometimes when we had Tauruses, that we were having to put a little restrictor in there to keep that noisy coolant from going through the heater core and irritating the people. Some of the mechanics wouldn't pay a lot of attention to which one of the pipes they would put that thing in, and it would bust the doggone heater core on the cars and just drive people nuts. And the heater core would have to be replaced. Okay, so anyway, so a cooling system with an off-balance pH, whether it's acid or alkaline, will create an electrolysis that not only attacks the engine block, but also the aluminum heater core. We need to go the extra mile. All right, so this is a little sidebar right here. This owner called me and said if anybody could use, he aired his frustration by the fact that every technician he had hired for the past 2 years had disappointed him. Now this guy was paying the mechanics he was hiring, and I'm going to get back to the expedition in a minute, I hadn't forgot about it. He was paying his guys straight time wages, and he was paying them generously. They were not working on commission, and they go in there ready to move mountains and change the world, but after a while they would just lose their motivation, and they'd get to where they weren't turning any labor. And he just had a terrible time with that. Well, this guy that was working on this heater core job, I put him in there, and he did the guy a really good job, of course. And later on, he got a job at the local GM dealership, and that's been 5, 6, 8 years ago. Anyway, that guy's making really good money at that GM dealership where I put him. And it's an air-conditioned shop, and everything's really nice. He knows where his bread's buttered. And besides that, he always wanted to go work at the GM dealer. He told me that whenever he came into my program as a dual enrollment student. Anyway, long and the short of it is, one of the things that mechanics typically perform best when they're on commission, but it can be frustrating when you have a couple of bad weeks. You know, you have 2 bad weeks and get so far behind on your bills, it takes you 6 weeks to catch up. So, you know, having a straight time guarantee plus commission works best, you know, because you're chasing a little bit of carrot that way. Well, I dumped the rusty sledge on there. I basically took the, I kept putting water in the radiator. I took heater hoses off, and I put it so that it was just nothing but rusty water in there. And I kept, with the engine running and the water pump pumping, I kept putting water in it until I pumped every bit of that rusty sledge out of there, and got rid of all of that hogwash as much as I could. Anyway, you know, so you're not going to be able to make it like a brand new engine. There's just no way. There's too much of that stuff in there. And if you're lucky, the impeller on the pump, if it's a steel one, hadn't been eaten away and the pump hadn't cavitated so that it won't pump water like it should. But you can put a clear hose in between the heater hoses, and you can crank it up and watch that stuff go through that clear hose instead of the heater core, and you can tell if the water pump is pumping like it should, or if it's not, you can tell that too. Alright, so if you see crud like that, it needs to be flushed out before it's allowed to rush in there and clog the new heater core. The manufacturer recommended coolant changes help prevent that from happening too. Now this Mazda is a short story. Had a mill light. Pulled the P0135 code, which points to an HO2S11 heater circuit. Just about everybody has seen one of those. Usually it'll be a bad O2 sensor or heater. You pull the O2 sensor off and you measure the 2 wires that are the same color, and they ought to read about 5 or 6 ohms. If they don't, then you typically got a burned out heater in that thing. And that heater is basically like a little diesel glow plug, but it's down inside that sensor, and it warms it up really fast so it can come online and start closing loops sooner. Anyway, not rocket science to troubleshoot that. what I like to do when I'm troubleshooting these heaters on these oxygen sensors, I save all of the plugs off of these oxygen sensors. You know how the two wires are the same color? Those are black, those are white. Those are your heater wires. And if you take a light bulb and connect it between the two heater wires, and you plug that light bulb and that pigtail in like it was a oxygen sensor, and you crank it up, then that light ought to come on. If the light doesn't come on, you need to find out whether you've lost power or ground. Now, if you wanted to put some kind of a silly little LED in there, you could, but I want to put something in there that's going to pull some current. And so anyway, I fixed a bunch of them like that. And put a little bulb, any kind of little bulb in there like that. That bulb's not really big enough. I would really rather use a tail light bulb, if I could, or a stoplight bulb. Stoplight bulb will have a couple ohms of resistance, and when it's cold, and it's more resistance when it's hot, when it's burning. And a tail light bulb usually has about a half an ohm or something like that, if I remember right, or 8/10. Anyway, so we found that sensor had good 12-volt power available to the heater, so we didn't need to go that way. All right, but we didn't have a ground. This control is grounded output from the PCM, and that's where we found something. We had nothing between here and here. We had a ground here, but it wasn't making it up there. Somebody had replaced the oxygen sensor, and that's where it was coming out of the PCM, and that's where it was right there. And so what we basically did was, we even found a piece of wire that was the right color, and we ran an overlay and put it inside the harness to keep it out of trouble. And once we did that, the problem was fixed. Took care of that. Now I got a pop test for you guys. That's all about air conditioning, but I'm going to see how you do on that. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. And I'm using a new camera, so give me some feedback on the quality of the video image, and I'll talk to you next time.
you.